بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
أتاكم أهل اليمن أدعفوا قلوبا وأرقوا أفئدة الفقه يمان والحكمة يمانية. I was preparing some notes for our normal Saturday class, Islam in Depth. I wanted to use Imam al-Ghazali's his seminal work, the Ihya Ulum al-Din, as a kind of point of departure. There's something very nice in the front section of his work. And before I go into it, the Ihya is a somewhat controversial work, at least certainly in the academic field. And of course, many people object to some of its use of questionable prophetic reports, hadith, and so on. And I've actually heard myself several times that the Ihya is like this desert island book, right? That if you were on a desert island and there was a book you would take with you, what would it be? And I've heard people say, "Oh, take the Ihya," right? Which is the translation is the revival of the religious sciences. And as much as I really appreciate Imam al-Ghazali as a great thinker, as a usuli scholar, I have to say, if I was going to be on a desert island, I think I would want a book that would either tell me how to survive on a desert island or how to get off of a desert island. I don't know if the Ihya would really do me much good on a desert island. Be that as it may, I appreciate a lot of Imam al-Ghazali's works. I'm not fanatical about him, as I sometimes find some people to be. But in the beginning, in his chapter on knowledge or ilm, he goes and he cites something in which he divides the category of knowledge up into separate groups. And he says, if I can recall the Arabic, because, he says, فَإِمَّا عِلْمُ طَرِيقِ الْآخِرَةِ, right? As it relates to the knowledge about the path to the next life. And he says, مَا دَرَجَ السَّلَفُ الصَّالِحُ عَلَيْهِ, that the pious predecessors tread upon. And he says, مِمَّا سَمَّاهُ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى فِي كِتَابِهِ, and it's also what is named and enumerated in the Book of Allah, right, in the Qur'an. And he says, saying that essentially what he's saying is that Allah talks about knowledge in the Qur'an, and of course the pious predecessors, sometimes what we call as Salaf as-Salih. So watch out, Salafi, right? More than just the Salafis refer to the term as Salaf as-Salih. He says that Allah has then described knowledge in different with different words. And he says, so we'll find what he says, fiqhan, right? Fiqh, which we use for comprehension or understanding, and what he describes as hikmah, what we often say is wisdom or the application of knowledge, discernment, judgment, and then ilman, what we might call analytical knowledge, diya'an wa nuran. Diya meaning that which kind of brightens or illuminates, nur, light, and then hidayatan wa rushdan, and the last two he describes as guidance and you could say, correct belief, rushd. I'm just going to talk briefly about this idea of fiqh. And what I like about it is that in of course contemplating the Book of Allah, right? There's just so much that it never ceases to give and to give and to give. So I said, I want to maybe try to find a few amthal, a few examples of the word fiqh in the Quran, and a few examples of the word fiqh as we find in the prophetic statements in the ahadith. And I came across the passage in the 11th chapter of the Quran, Surah Hud, and this is the story actually, even though it's about Prophet Hud, this section actually relates to the story of Shu'aib, and he's talking to his people, trying to call them to God and say, repent and this and this. And they respond back, قالوا يا شعيب ما نفقه كثيرا مما تقول. Oh Shu'aib, right? We don't understand a lot of what you're saying. فقه, right? ما نفقه كثيرا مما تقول وإنا لنراك فينا ضعيفا. Instead, we actually see you, as it pertains to us, we see you as kind of weak. وَلَوْلَا رَحْتُكَ لَرَجَمْنَكَ, right? And in fact, if it wasn't for the clan that you have an affiliation with, we would actually stone you, we would throw rocks at you. وَمَا أَنْتَ عَلَيْنَا بِعَزِيزٍ. We don't really think that much of you. And Shu'aib's rebuttal to this is, قال يا قوم أرهدي أعز عليكم من الله. He says, do you really esteem the people that I come from? Do you hold them in higher estimation of which you hold God? وَأَتَّخَذْتُمُوهُ وَرَآكُمْ ظَهْرِيًا. Right, and have you made God something so small to just cast away, right, behind your backs, right, turning your back on, right? Inna Rabbi bima ta'maluna muhit, right? He said, nah, God is aware and indeed surrounds, right, everything that which you're doing. So anyway, of course, these two verses, in the first one, it made mention of the word fiqh, which is, we said, is what? Comprehension. But then it also mentions the word da'if, right? We think you are very weak. And here it uses the word da'if in, say, the more textbook way, like something meaning, weak. But one of the beautiful things about the Quran and about the Prophet ﷺ, about the Sunnah, right? We often talk about, well, if you want to understand the Quran, it has to be understand with, this verse or that verse has to be understood within a certain context, right? So we have to take the Quran and we have to take the Sunnah, and then we have to distill them through a certain context to understand them correctly. And, obviously that can be true, within a certain scope. What this reminded me of is that we often forget is that the Quran and the Sunnah also contextualize things. They should also contextualize our understanding. A simple example of this is that, for instance, quite often when Allah uses the word kitab, which in English we call book, this doesn't mean just any book, right? But often refers to the Quran. So when Allah talks about the kitab, it is contextualizing that it refers to the Quran. Or for instance, the word yom, quite often, which in the English means day, right? The word yom is often recontextualized to mean the day of judgment, not just any day. And therefore, as I was looking up some prophetic examples that use the word fiqh, I came across a really beautiful hadith, and it relates to us something where the Prophet ﷺ was saying, he was giving some admirable qualities about the people from Yemen, and of course we know about the tragedy that's going on with the people of Yemen. May Allah Ta'ala indeed bring this conflict to an end and bring safety and healing to these people. So the Prophet ﷺ says, Atakum Ahl al-Yaman, right? The people of Yemen have come to you, right? And he says, Ad'afu quluban. Ad'afu quluban. They are, now this is the word here, ad'af, is the superlative, right? Meaning right, like big and bigger, right? It's the superlative of da'if. Da'if means what? Weak. And here, ad'af means, very weak, right? Or it can also mean to be soft. And so in this time, in this usage, the Prophet ﷺ recontextualizes a word that can often have a negative connotation or negative attribute associated with, and flips it to actually have a positive one, where he describes the people of Yemen as being ada'af quluban. They're very soft-hearted. Very soft-hearted. وَأَرَقُّ أَفْئِدَةً. Right? And they are, they are also their emotions. Because here we have qalb and fu'ad, right? Two words for heart, but also heart and emotion, right? Meaning that they're very soft, gentle, easygoing people. أَدْعَفُوا قُلُوبًا وَأَرَقُّ أَفْئِدَةً. And he says then, using the word fiqh, al-fiqhu yaman. Al-fiqhu yaman wal-hikmatu yamaniya. Wal-hikmatu yamaniya. Meaning that comprehension or understanding, particularly as it relates to religion, is a very Yemeni thing, and indeed wisdom and discernment and judgment is also a Yemeni quality. So it's some beautiful qualities that the Prophet ﷺ is telling us about the Yemeni people. But it also shows us how, while we may normally not think of weakness or softness being an admirable attribute for a people to have, the Prophet ﷺ is actually saying, no, they actually have a admirable attribute or quality. And of course, this again came about just from preparing some notes for us in class to go over to look at. And it's these simple kinds of little gems that we can mine, that if we just take a little bit of time to read, study, that it's so illuminating. When I read this, particularly coming from an American background, where our understanding of, say, masculinity, or our understanding of who a people should be, obviously we want to be resilient people, and there are aspects of masculinity. I mean, trust me, my last name is Manley. I think I'm pretty known where my stances on traditional masculinity are. I'm very pro-traditional masculinity. And yet, there is room within so-called traditional masculinity to also have a soft, easy, and warm heart. And we know that it will take a soft heart to turn to Allah, right? In fact, when Shu'aib, when he's preaching to the people, one of the issues is they're hard-hearted. And we live in a time where it seems like a lot of people are hard-hearted. And it's just a simple, beautiful reminder to keep this in mind. So something to really just more of encouragement, that if we ponder the Book of Allah, if we study the life of the Prophet ﷺ, if we read about these things, that there will also just be great beauty. I mean, I think just a short while ago, and I think I had done a video, and I was even talking with my mentor, Dr. Jackson, about the need for Muslims just to have an aesthetic appreciation of Islam, and appreciating Islam just on the beauty of it. And when you do things like this, you really see the beauty of it. So, inshallah, I hope this may provide a few more insights. I had to unfortunately cancel this morning's class due to really being under the weather a little bit, but inshallah, I plan to be back next week. I'll try to record that section or that session, inshallah, and get them up. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.